sure I feel quite worthy of applause yet. Hopefully later in the evening you might feel that way. I'm going to introduce our wonderful panellists, and it's my pleasure and honour to do so. And I'd like to thank all of you for being here to hear them. So I've got quite long biographies for all of them because they're incredibly impressive. So bear with me and listen to all their many wonderful achievements. And so if I start here, just on my near right, we have Anna Romandash, who is a multi-award-winning journalist and writer from Ukraine. She's author of Women of Ukraine, Reportage from the War and Beyond, which she'll be signing after the event if you want to purchase a copy. And this tells stories of Ukrainian resilience, courage, and also loss amid the Russian invasion. Anna writes on human rights and all things Ukraine for a variety of international media. Her work has been awarded by the Centre for Media Pluralism and Freedom, Internews, Hostwriter, and the European Institute of the Mediterranean. Anna was also named Media Freedom Ambassador of Ukraine for her human rights and media work. And she's currently with us tonight in her capacity as the PEN Ukraine and English PEN writer in residence for their Stories of Resilience project. So she's been doing field work in Ukraine, gathering stories, and is now coming to the UK for some writing and events like this one, and going to produce work that I think will be produced as a pamphlet towards the end of the project, so watch out for that. And then we have Yulia Musakovska, a Ukrainian poet and translator. She's published 6 poetry collections in Ukrainian, most recently Stones and Nails earlier this year. Her collection, The God of Freedom, was among the finalists for the Lviv's UNESCO City of Literature Prize and one of the top 8 nominees for the Taras Shevchenko National Prize. I should also say that Yulia will be signing copies of The God of Freedom after the event tonight as well. So when we go into the library for the reception afterwards, you'll be able to purchase those. Since I've just looked up from my notes briefly, I feel I also ought to apologise for any mispronunciation that I might accidentally injure the language with. I don't speak Ukrainian myself. I feel very honoured to be part of working with these people, but please forgive me if I pronounce things in a horrible way. So, the book, The God of Freedom, was released in translation by Arrowsmith Press, by Olena Jennings, translated by Olena Jennings and Yulia herself. Yulia has received many literary awards in Ukraine, including the prominent, I'm going to pronounce this one wrong, I'm going to trip over now, the Smoloskip Prize, thank you, for poetry. And her poems have been translated into over 30 languages and published worldwide. In 2023, she paused her 20-year career in business and IT to dedicate herself to cultural activism and global advocacy for Ukraine. And as a translator, Yulia works with English and Swedish and is a member of PEN Ukraine. Next we have Olena Husseinova, a radio host, radio producer and writer. She works at Radio Culture and received the Ivan Franko Award jointly with Miroslav Layuk for the special project Lesya Ukrainka, 30 radio stories. Okay, I'm getting a nod, so I didn't massacre it too much. Okay, Olena is author of 2 poetry collections, Open Rider in 2012 and Superheroes in 2016, as well as 3 poetry books, including Night Air, published in 2024. Superheroes won first prize in the Illustrators competition at the International Festival Book Arsenal in 2017, as well as several prestigious international awards in the field of book design. She's written essays and other short pieces, including in Ukraine 22, Ukrainian Writers Respond to War, which was published by Penguin last year, and has also been translated into Polish, Czech, Slovak, Hebrew, Finnish, Lithuanian, Estonian, and other languages. See, now I bet you're feeling that I didn't deserve the round of applause, because really, it should be coming at the end. But before you do, let me introduce our final speaker, Hanna Hryakova, who is a culturologist and the Communications and International Manager at Lviv UNESCO City of Literature. Working internationally, she's mostly interested in nuances of languages and translation, specifically in the Ukrainian language and its relations to other languages. Hannah also occupies the position of communication manager for several artistic projects. Recently, she performed as part of a team on the Unseen Force project, which highlights via an artistic perspective the difficulties of living in temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. Hannah recently joined the team of the Home of Sound Institution in Lviv and now is researching how the soundscape affects our self-feeling and how the soundscape of war specifically affects our daily lives. So please, I think the round of applause is more than justified. I'm going to take a seat now to start this conversation so that it can be a little less formal. I have a series of questions to put to our speakers, and then there will be time at the end for any audience questions. So if there are things during the course of the evening that you think you'd like to ask, we'll make space for those at the end before we have a glass of wine. So I want to open with a question about the danger to your culture. So the hybrid war that Russia is leading means that Ukrainian culture is under threat. What does living in an endangered culture mean to you and for you?
I can start. Good evening. It's nice to be here. Thank you for having us. Thank you, Helen, for the wonderful introduction. And addressing your question, we are not just living in an endangered culture, we're also living in an endangered country. So in addition to erasing Ukrainian national identity and the culture, Russia strives to physically erase as many Ukrainians as possible. So the similar things happened with the language bans and culture bans during the times of Russia's colonization of Ukraine in the times of Russian Empire. And the physical extermination of Ukrainian intellectuals happened during the Soviet occupation. So now Russia's leadership and Russia's propagandists are expressing open genocidal intents as to the Ukrainian people and also to multiple other nations. So this means that we don't know how much time we have left. So as creative people, all of us have different kinds of initiatives and projects and books that we are writing, and we don't know if we are going to finish them or not. So one of the things is, for example, we're giving guidance to our friends and loved ones on how to deal with our work in case anything happens. And also it means that if we are out there on different platforms, we do not just speak for ourselves, we speak for our colleagues who cannot be here for many different reasons, sometimes very sad ones. But it also means that not knowing how much time we have left, we are trying to focus on what we believe in, on what we feel makes impact, and what we feel that we are passionate about. So it means creating culture, promoting Ukrainian culture, and this is why I personally changed my role that I've been holding for many years.
When I was thinking about your question, I found myself that this culture, which is in the risk, is my job. It happened in summer 2022, when radio came back from evacuation, and I found my team after evacuation, and we started preparing Independence Day. We have a special program on radio which is connected with poetry. It's just poetry reading 3 times a day. And I understood that I need a special issue of this program for this Independent Day on 2022. And I decided that it should be voices of poets who are on frontline now, and I started to write them. And I find it was like 4 of them. and I write them a message. I wrote them on a messenger, and I found that no one had opportunity to record voice, even for me, for radio. And the fifth one, Hlib Babic, was killed already during mission, so his soldier mission. And then I find myself as a person who will be this one to be very attentive and very quick to find these people, those who are on front line and who are writing poetry or not only poetry, and try to record them. And that's very strange feeling when you are like, you should be very fast to see this moment when the person is on his vacation in Kyiv, and to find time for him or for her and for yourself to record. But this my understanding that I have to be very fast to make this library of voices didn't help me. I was sure that I have a lot of time, plenty of time for recording Victoria Amelina, but actually it wasn't so. And probably that's for now the only voice which I have, which I do not have in my voice library. But when you ask me what is to be a part of this culture which is in risk, is to do my job, to collect and to make this archive of the voices.
Yeah, I will just shortly add to what Alana said about that Victoria Amelina's case. So as a City of Literature, we work mostly with strategies and programs to develop more literacy in Lvivian life. So we did create cultural spaces or projects around literature and literacy, and one of them was a video blog about the writers who are somehow connected to the reality of war. And we have a season of this videos, and we have 3 episodes, so we have to carefully choose 3 writers who will represent Ukraine. And we do this for international audience and for television, so the series will lately come on Suspilne. And we've decided to choose Victoria as one of our heroines because she did this great job volunteering and going on the front line to document the war crimes. Thank you. And we mailed her, and she was like casually, okay, I will come, I'll go to Kyiv now, and then I will have a small trip, and then I'll come and we can record me. And it never happened to happen. So living in an endangered culture means that you have to cherish every moment with every writer that is presented in your culture, in your literature, or every artist that is presented on your museums, just because you don't know when will be the last time when you'll be able to talk to them.
Well, I can add, I'm a journalist, so somewhat I am a person of culture, mostly because I observe people of culture. I collect their stories, I collect their testimonies. Before the start of the full-scale invasion, I was working as a foreign correspondent, so I was writing for Ukrainians about what was happening in the world. So in 2022, I came back to Ukraine and I was doing the exact opposite. I was telling foreigners what was happening in Ukraine, because I felt that a lot of reporting done by non-Ukrainian journalists wasn't what I would consider good journalism. And a lot of good writing that was done in Ukraine was just not getting to people because of language barriers and a lot of other things. So as a journalist, I was traveling to different parts of Ukraine. As soon as they got deoccupied, it was safe-ish enough to travel and talk to people. And a lot of them were people of culture, and a lot of them wanted to share their stories with me specifically because, you know, I don't know, I'm a young woman, I'm a journalist, I'm a little bit, that they related to me, I guess, better than to foreign journalists traveling to their parts, to talking to them with translator or asking them to speak Russian to them, because that was the only language foreign correspondents from New York Times, from other places, spoke when they were in Ukraine. So I was talking to a lot of artists, writers, theater actors, archaeologists who survived occupation, and they were just very happy to be able to speak Ukrainian to me. So it was shocking to me to see that this kind of level of discrimination, even now under the full-scale invasion, 2 years of the full-scale invasion, we still struggle communicating our message across, because there's still a lot of tropes or a lot of ideas or myths that are so penetrated into a lot of thinking that you really need good journalism, good writing to be able to deliver different messages. So living in a country where culture is endangered, so I think Ukrainian culture has been endangered for a very long time, right? The full-scale invasion is just the culmination. For a very long time, this notion of the Russian world was just penetrating Ukraine, a lot of neighboring countries, and now it's turned from the words into the physical extermination. But I'm also talking to people who've been tortured for speaking Ukrainian, for writing Ukrainian. I've talked to people in Kherson who told me, you know, while there were Russian soldiers, Russian tanks on the streets, we managed to find a shelter where we would gather as poets and we would read Ukrainian poetry and we would publish things on Facebook and we would publish motivational posts and we would publish this and this and this and this. So that was amazing in a sense. And writing about it, getting to deliver that, it was also like, I was really humbled to be able to do that, right? And I understand that it is a privilege for me to be able to communicate that, because there is somebody fighting for me to be able to talk about this culture to a lot of people. So there is this human resilience, there is this power of Ukrainian culture to resist a lot of things, a lot of adversities. Just one thing, maybe this is from purely journalistic perspective. We write about culture, we talk about culture, we create culture. I really want that culture also to be well received, to be consumed by people, because what are we all doing this for, right? I want Ukrainians to read Ukrainian authors, but I also want the world to be able to read Ukrainian authors, to be able to discover that. In 2022, writing about Ukraine, there was just such a big demand for everybody to finally discover or rediscover Ukraine. In 2024, as I'm writing now about, the stories didn't change, still amazing stories of Ukrainians who overcome so many challenges. But a lot of people are like, you know, we learned enough, okay? We're now gonna learn about some other cultures. We're gonna report on something else. We don't have the budgets anymore, you know? We know you've got great writers and you know you've survived this and you know but we're not interested anymore. So this is another challenge, that we are endangered in a very obvious physical way, but there's also this danger of being forgotten or of being overlooked, of not being perceived as important enough, you know? What's new? What's another new tragedy? That's the worst thing about discovering culture where it's endangered. You know, we should discover and celebrate cultures so they don't become endangered.
Thank you for all those wonderful responses. And the thing that I think comes through from what all of you are saying is that it's not just your own voices that you're promoting, but rather you carry with you, as you come to visit us or as you go about your work, the voices of so many others. And especially with this urgency, because those voices might be cut short. So I wondered whether we might hear about or from some of the people who are no longer with us, perhaps through a reading, if you have a poem that you can read from one of those we have lost.
I think I will start, and we were talking about whom we will read today, and we decided that we have a great desire not to read those who are not with us already, but to give space for voices of those who are with us and who are our defenders. But I will try to tell the story about Max Krivtsov, whom for sure you know about. And I will start and then Yulia will continue. Max, he was like, immediately he turned to be a star in the beginning of this year, January 7, 2024, when he was killed. But I met him 2020 in radio studio. It was it was right after the release of the film Our Cats. Probably some of you saw this film. It is comedy about first Ukrainian soldiers, first civilians who decided to be soldiers in 2014. The script of this film was written by another military poet, Valery Puzikin, and he is with us. What is miracle, and we are happy, of course. And Max wrote just the lyrics for the film song, Yellow Tape. Probably you also know this song. And I am not a fan of such kind of lyrics, but my colleagues wanted him in studio very much, so I was for this. As far as he was a very nice person. At this moment, he was demobilized already, and he worked in different veterans initiatives, and so he was very nice. But this time for interview is just 20 minutes. And what did Max? Max was late for 15 minutes. And as far as I'm an editor-in-chief, I was extremely angry. We put twice this tape song and so on, and then he came, said a couple of words, and my colleague asked to record his poetry, and I said, record him, but I don't want to see him anymore. Of course, in 2022, he returned to army, and I found his poem in April 2023. It was first year of Kiev region deoccupation, and he has still, it is in his book, a great poem about 3 people from Bucha who was tortured, and one of these heroes, he had a cat, and this cat was like Eclair, and it was so other Max voice, poetic voice, that I was absolutely shocked. And it was like something extraordinary happened with his poetic language. And in May 2023, I was a curator of poetic stage in Kiev Book Arsenal, and I decided to start this number of poetic events with event which I titled Poetry in Pixel. And during these readings, only poets who are in army forces should read their poetry, and it should be 7 of them, and it was just 4 of them. 3 of them couldn't be on readings because Artur Dronin, Liza Zharikova, and Max, 3 of them were busy this moment on front line. But it was miraculously, Max came on the last day of the Book Arsenal, and I saw him, and it was also another kind of readings, and I was already on the stage, and I saw him near the stage, and he sent me a message, I'm here, and I am listening to you. And I said, come up and read, and he was not sure, but then we made him come up. And when I saw him, I hugged him, and it wasn't okay. Like, we are we weren't friends, and we all have this new feeling of measures. But I hugged him, and he read, and then next day he came to the radio, and we recorded like 30 minutes of his reading. And next time when I saw him, he was in coffin, and I put my hand on his cold hand. And that's very special moments, which impossible to believe we have as our own experience. It's okay to read about such things in some fictional books, probably not very good books, but it is something which impossible to believe when it is a part of your experience.
I should probably add that thanks to Olena's work in Maxim's book, there are links to his recordings reading his poems on radio culture. And you can find it and you can listen to his voice. And actually,
he wasn't the best reader of his poetry, but that's so important to hear his own voice.
And it is important to read those poets, to appreciate these authors while they are still alive, and that is the main message. And we are doing our small contribution into this, and it was actually our colleagues from the Exeter University with whom we have started the project, the Ukrainian wartime poetry, who really appreciated Maxim's poetry and translated probably his most famous poem, Mary to Golgotha, and were very eager to promote his work and find him a publisher for his work to be translated and published in English. But then together with us, they have received this sad news, and I think they have shared our devastation. And this is of course a huge loss for all of us and internationally, because Maxim was making huge progress with his work getting translated also into Polish and Lithuanian, and now his bilingual book was published in Poland. He didn't have time to find out about this. He only got to hold his Ukrainian book in his hands, and he was glad about the first positive feedbacks the book was receiving. But now, of course, we're organizing readings and different commemorative events. But the most important thing is to read the authors and to appreciate them while they can still at least find out about it and be happy about it. And I will probably continue with the different category, so to say, a very special category of the people that are not with us for a different reason, and even that we don't know where they are at the moment. And this is about the missing persons. And one of our colleagues, Ukrainian poet and book designer and illustrator Mykola Leonovich, is now missing. It was his first battle more than a year ago, when in his first battle, he went missing. And still, his wife and his daughters have no news about him. Of course, we all are hoping that he might be in Russian captivity, and we are expecting and hoping for the good news to come. But it is so with the missing people. We don't know where they are. We don't have any information about them, and this makes it really, really difficult. And with that hope, I think when we speak about them and when we read their work, it is very important to remind that these people exist, and we still consider that they are here with us. And with that, I have a permission from Mykola's wife, who has collected his second book of poetry, which will come out with Small Escape Publishing House, and it will be called A Slow Person. So I have a permission from Marina to read his poem here tonight, while she is traveling internationally, advocating for the release of Ukrainian prisoners of war. So it would be my honor to read Mykola's poem that I decided to translate especially for this trip to UK. And I think I'll read it in Ukrainian first. And thank you to Hugh Roberts for editing the English translation. But let's hear how it sounds in Ukrainian. So the title of the poem is very symbolic also. It's Your Unnoticeable Ones. And the unnoticeable can be referred to the missing persons, of course. So it's for us to make them seen, make them be seen. Інколи просто не помічаєш, як перестаєш боятися. Просто життя не залежить від кількості сказаних слів. І ті люди, які тебе, мислив, забули, озиваються, наче птахи з дерев. І луни голосів цих із гілок скрапують, скочуються зеленим мохом, втопають у ньому. Там, де ходив, стежки давно вже позаростали. Ні корови сюди не ведуть, ні хліб не привозять. Небо тільки понад ліском напинається. Полощиться, полощиться, доки вся синява із нього виходить. Куди ж цікаво знати, вона перетікає. І здається, що та, за якою ідеш, уже зовсім близько, на горбочку, між деревами тихо сміється. Настільки, що в цій тиші тутешній це означає бути почутим. І я сміюся, і, може, за мною теж хтось іде, так само, без жодної торби, залишивши зайве там, де можна було боятися. В тому, що називалося домом, не дошукуючись слідів. Кожен із нас у цьому світі вперше. And I will ask Helen to read the English translation.
Your unnoticeable ones. Sometimes you simply don't notice when you stop being afraid. Your life simply doesn't measure up to the number of spoken words. And those people who, as you thought, forgot you, call to you like birds from the trees. And the echoes of these voices drip from the branches, roll down like green moss, they drown in it. Grass and weeds have grown over the paths you walked. They drive no bread here, no cows lead you here. Only the sky stretches tightly over the woods, rinsed and rinsed until all blue washes out of it. Where, I wonder, does it all flow? And it seems the one you follow is very close, on the hill among the trees, laughing gently, so quietly, which, in this silence, means being heard. And I'm laughing, and maybe someone is following behind me in the same way, without any bags, having left things you don't need in a place where you could be afraid back then, in a place called home. Not looking for footprints. Every one of us is in this world for the first time. Thank you so much for sharing Mykola's work with us. And I think it highlights the urgency of ensuring that these voices are heard, whether it's people who will never be able to write again, people who you love who are missing, or whether it's people who are defending Ukraine now, whether that's on the front line or whether it's elsewhere. So I think perhaps we could think a little bit about those who are still with us and fighting in different ways. So whether it's poets from the front line, or Anna, you've interviewed in your book the women of Ukraine, or you've written about the women of Ukraine. So perhaps could I ask you to talk a little more about the testimonies and stories of people who are still with us and fighting for Ukraine to be free?
I can talk about that a little bit. It does happen sometimes that in my work I discover something or somebody when it's too late. So I try to discover people, stories, testimonies when I can still talk to the heroes or heroines and get the testimony from them. So when Kherson was deoccupied, I really wanted to go there because while it was still being occupied, while it was still under occupation, I managed to contact some people who were giving me some bits, some clips, some pieces of information while being in Kherson, and they did it with a great danger to themselves, and I managed to get some information out of them, but of course it was very limited. So one of the people that really, I don't know, it was very difficult for me to talk to her, and it was very difficult for her to talk to me. She was a journalist like me. Before the full-scale invasion, she was working for a regional TV channel in Kherson. She wasn't, doing any national reporting, but just being a journalist, that was already bad enough for Russian army, because they knew people, they had lists of people they were specifically targeting. So when the full-scale invasion started, Kherson was really quickly occupied, and she never for a second even considered leaving the city. She had some opportunities, and you probably maybe have heard of it. There were some ways to either to flee through occupied Crimea or through some other means. She wanted to stay right away. She was organizing a lot of underground meetings with journalists, with cultural workers. They were reading poetry. They were doing their resistance as best as they could in the conditions, changing addresses, changing locations all the time because she knew she was being spied on or targeted. And then one day she wasn't as careful as she was before, and that's understandable. We get tired, and being in occupation, it's very difficult to describe the mental state of being in occupation, right? So one day she wasn't as careful as she was before, and a car. So those usually were vans without driver's license, kind of unmarked, but everybody knew who they were, and they were just driving around the city. The car just followed her, grabbed her, put a bag on her head, and then the story was she was tortured. She was in the Russian torture camp for more than a month. Her partner was also tortured because of her. So he wasn't a person of culture. He wasn't somebody on their list. They just felt that Russians just felt it would be fun to torture him, as a company to her. And after months of torture and all of this, she was released. And then she immediately tried to get out of occupation. Obviously, after spending a month under this torture and beating and everything, she knew she couldn't stay there anymore. She would lose her mind. She wanted to get to free Ukraine. So the moment she got to free Ukraine, I was in contact with her before Russians captured her, and obviously I kind of expected that something bad happened to her because she stopped reaching out to me for a while. And then after she was released, she told me, I'm alive, I'm in Ukraine. And then And then she was gone. She couldn't speak for some time. So she was in Free Ukraine, she was in Ukraine-controlled territories, and she had to go through all of this mental, physical rehabilitation. She just couldn't take it anymore, and it was just very, very hard. So when her son was liberated, this is when she finally was strong enough that she could talk, because for her, liberation of her city was kind of like a liberation of herself, like she could finally kind of make peace with what happened to her. And I think the worst part for me of her story was that after she was able to talk to me, she put me in touch with a lot of people from Kherson. And the thing that sucked the most was that her story was so typical. It was not a unique story at all. It wasn't like this happened to this one person and that's so crazy, right? Because no, it happened to hundreds of people there. It was always the same routine, the same truck, the same methods, the same everything, the same consequences for people. And it was just, and at some point, she even said it was like a template, torturing people for who they are, for what they do. It was kind of like a template. So I wrote about her. Mostly she did the talking, and I just kind of copied a lot of her words of that experience. But this is just something that's, you talk to people, you shocked, and then you kind of just, it's like you're tired of shocking. You just hear these stories and it's like, when is this going to end? Like, I'm collecting these testimonies because I thought there would be, one story, and I'll write it, and everybody's going to be outraged, and then it's going to stop, right? There's going to be some reaction, something, and it's just, you talk to people and you collect this, and it's just, unbelievable. Another person whose story really touched me, also an artist, also a soldier, and a mother who had to try to get her kid out of Russia because her kid was deported while she was in the Ukrainian armed forces. So she got wounded on the front lines. She doesn't have a husband. The child was with grandparents. Grandparents were old, and they were all in occupation. And that's Kharkiv region. And Kharkiv region got liberated. So when Russians were retreating, they left the grandparents there, but they took the kid. And they just put the kid for adoption. And she's a soldier here in Ukraine, and she's wounded. And she cannot go to Russia to get her child. And she's talking to me, and she's able to communicate this information rather well, right? She already relived through that experience many, many times. And she's telling me all of this. It's like we're having a normal conversation, but I'm listening to it and I'm like, what am I hearing? This is just 21st century Europe. Like, my eye should be bleeding and my ear should be bleeding. I shouldn't have to collect such stories. This is just unbelievable. So the thing is, I think at some point when we're collecting these testimonies and we're writing these testimonies, we just become so dehumanized and just so angry. Like, I write this and I just feel so much anger, and I don't know where to direct it. And then sometimes I work as a fixer, sometimes I work with foreign journalists, and they respond very differently to me, to those same stories. And sometimes I feel like I have to justify to them certain words or certain phrases or certain reactions. It's like I have to justify to them our right to be angry and our right to write in a certain way and things like this. And that's the reality for cultural workers, that's a reality for a lot of women, that's a reality for a lot of Ukrainians. That kind of trauma, and people just carry on and they carry that pain in them, and they have very few means to direct it somewhere. And I think this is something that our poets, our writers, all of us, we will just have a very long time to process all of that, and we will have a lot of themes to write about it. That's just going to be like the key message of a lot of our writing, poetry, visuals, and so on.
When you're talking like that, it strikes me you know, the emotional impact that it has on you as well, the work that you do and the voices that you're representing and carrying. And Hannah, I wondered, in your role with the City of Literature work or with the soundscapes, is this something that you encounter as well, this anger, how do you process, how do you deal with all of these testimonies?
Personally, I don't have much time to think about the emotions that I have, because every day I have to go and do my work. And it's only here, for example, when I understood, we've been here for a couple of days, and I understood that I actually have feelings and I can understand them. But whilst you're there, I think it's more traumatic for me now to work with the sound. We have this exhibition about the soundscapes. So it's like you enter the space in the exhibition hall, and there's the sound projected on live stream from Kharkiv or from Donetsk or from wherever the artist is in that very moment. So there is no chance to edit anything. And it can be a casual thing up until one day it was a live stream from Kharkiv. And we had a girl, there is the girl who administrates this space, and her parents live in Kharkiv. And everything was quite casual. The stream box is located in the Slovo residency. It's a well-known literary space in the city. And accidentally, she hears, and we as well, because we are in the same space, we hear that there's a missile attack and there's a bombing right next to the space, and her parents are there, and she just goes, I have to write to my parents. And we are in complete shock every time, no matter how many times you've heard the explosions. It's every time it's like the first time. But what I am worried for is for her, because now I stick to her emotions, and then she writes to her parents, and they're like, okay, they are okay. I can continue doing my work. So the point of this is that I don't really have time to process the emotions that I have, and I will leave it until the victory, and then I will think about what I felt at this time.
You know, as a poet, I think I'm quite fortunate because of poetry, because I have poetry as a means to sort of process my emotions, and I think my colleagues would probably agree with me. In a way, we do experience and feel a lot of anger and rage and pain, of course. And through poetry, we can kind of just to a small extent cope with these emotions, and also to transfer this emotion to the reader and to the audience if this poetry is being read, presented. So I think that nothing puts a reader in the author's shoes better than a poetry, because it has this emotional leverage, and it kind of brings this described experience closer to you. Even if you cannot fully understand it, you can still feel the person's pain and rage and anger and joy, of course. But now the poems that we are writing are full of anger, so politically incorrect. And that's a quote from Timothy Snyder's translation of my poem that I wrote in early 2022. This is something that we use now as a pretext, as a conversation starter about the events that these poems were born from, because these are born from our reflections and experiences that we have, our reaction to the events that are happening in our country. And I hear it from people in different countries that for them to see someone in person who comes from the war-affected country and even sometimes speaking the language that they speak it shortens the distance between our experiences. But of course, we don't want anyone to get near to what we are experiencing. Yes, and another thing about the stories, as a translator, not just a poet, I feel that my translator role is sometimes getting more important in times like this, because I'm able to bring the works of, for example, our military poets to the external audiences, and this is my main focus as a translator right now. And I'm just going to show you this small pamphlet that we put together with colleagues from the Exeter University and co-edited with Hugh Roberts, published and illustrated by the students of the Manchester University. And this pamphlet has the poems mostly by Ukrainian soldier poets. And I think we have several available here tonight. And the people, the authors that are included here are very vivid examples of who is serving in the Ukrainian army and who is now shielding not just Ukraine, but actually the entire Europe and probably the entire global democracy. So these are people like Liza Zharikova, who was a piano teacher and who is a musician and who was a teacher of Ukrainian literature and now serving in the army. These are people like Artur Drony, who is 24 and now on the front line, and he used to be an event manager in a publishing house. And these are people like Eva Tur, who is a graphic artist and a cultural scholar, and has joined the army ranks actually even before the full-scale invasion. So, yeah. I really urge you to discover all these names, and we will do our best to make them available for you and for wider audiences in English.
I think it's really fascinating the way you've all anticipated a question I was going to ask actually about the connections between poetry and non-fiction. Because obviously we have here two poets, a writer of non-fiction journalistic writing and someone whose job is to protect and promote Ukrainian culture. And it feels that there are so many overlaps between them, both in the way it changes your own work and the emotions that you're processing that you have to deal with and that come out in that work. Also, what comes across to me when you're speaking is the sheer scale of what you're going through, of what Ukraine is going through. And I had noted down a quote from Alexander Mikhed, who said that one of the functions of art now is to try to remind people that this scale of loss is not normal. And in some ways, I feel implicitly you've already answered this question, but I'd like to ask explicitly how your work engages with this scale of loss and how we can ensure that people, not just in Ukraine, but elsewhere, here, for example, are constantly reminded of this, that we don't get that. You know, Anna, you were saying earlier that there comes a point when it's shock after shock after shock and you almost become immune to it. How do we make sure that we remember that this scale of loss is not normal?
Actually, we are talking about this for the whole year, I think. In the end, probably not in it will be the long year of talking about this with colleagues in different spheres, both in the field of literature and in the field of journalism. What we should do with our language to find way to those who read in different languages. And when Anna said that she finds herself in a serial stories which are not exclusive but typical, and it is difficult to find for them a reader, one more reader, once again to find a reader for the story about a woman who was who find herself in occupation in Kherson. And I was thinking the whole day today about this, and we even have a small discussion what our poetry or our writing is now. When we read news and then we made poetry, when we listened to other people's stories and then made some fictional things, what we are doing, whether we all have to left our fiction writing and start to document things which are on front line or on the occupied territories, or should we do something else? And in this very moment, here in this room, I realized that the only way to stay visible to the world and to make world share with us what we are experiencing is to be inside of the fiction. So that's very moment for Ukrainian writers to use all this experience of documenting and to start make fictional things. Probably not only for writers, but for people who deals with films or with photograph. We should make this big step and try to make some great fictional things, because otherwise we turned into something invisible. It will be one more story about small deoccupied village in Kharkiv region, and it is impossible to make it interesting or visible if you just retell the story about, even if it is 15,000 people who saved themselves from occupation. And the only way to be visible and to be heard is to make this step into fictional.
And that's, I think, also with the poetry. It is not documenting. It has this element of fiction where we are adding our own feelings to the descriptions of the events, especially when we are observers, and sometimes close and sometimes far. Poetry is, of course, now more built around attention rather than imagination, but there's always this element there, and that's what makes poetry powerful, because it kind of gives you this cinematic image of what has happened, and for us it's now mostly writing about the war.
If I can add, I do believe in power of storytelling and truth-telling, and I think this is what separates us from anybody else. Because we humans, we need stories to communicate. We need to add context. We invented language so we could tell stories, and that's how we also cope with a lot of things. But I also think it's very important to understand, again, why we are doing this. Like for me, I collect these stories. Well, yes, I am a journalist. This is my main field of work, but I also do this because I know that I need to do this. This is important for me. This is, I could be in a lot of places. A lot of soldiers who are currently on the front line could be in a lot of other places, but they chose to be there because they know what they need to do. They know where they are important the most for themselves. This is where they make the most sense for themselves. And I think a lot of Ukrainians, whether soldiers or writers or others, they know that doing what they're doing, this is what makes the most sense to them. So this is not even for the external audience. This is also for you to make sense of yourself as a human being. So in many ways, this kind of truth-telling and storytelling, it will continue because we do have this belief, we have this space, we have this enthusiasm, and we hope that there will be a response or empathy that that wouldn't have a limitation in time or other forms of limitation. So I think this would go on. And I think this is also important for us as Ukrainians to communicate these stories for ourselves. So I think before we are able to explain ourselves to non-Ukrainians, we also need to understand ourselves, because different Ukrainians have different experiences. Sometimes a person from occupied territory or from deoccupied territory has a hard time explaining what they lived through to a person who is from a much safer part of the country. So there are already these issues in translation between people who speak the same language and who are from the same country. So we also understand that it's difficult to understand these experiences when you live in a different kind of world, in a different kind of reality. And I'll finish with this. So I just recently met with a British journalist, and he was telling me, oh, I'm going to Ukraine in a few days. I'm flying into this airport in Poland, that I'm taking this train, and I'm on foot. So yeah, I'm leaving Europe and I'm getting into this, I don't know what. And the way he was speaking about it, he meant it in a very nice way. I'm not giving you the whole context, but I thought it was really strange, like the words he used. You know, it was kind of like, I'm leaving Europe and I'm getting into something. And I think our job is to explain that something to people. So it has a shape, it has a word. We don't need to prove anything to anybody, but we should give meaning to what Ukraine is, what it is like to be Ukrainian, what it's like to be part of Ukrainian culture, which is so integrated into European culture, but which was always kind of like this poor neighbor that was rejected by its other neighbors. So I think we have a lot of work, and we don't have time to process the trauma and the damage done to us, because we have so much work to do. So it's the work is what saves us, and it's just gonna keep on making a lot of people, you know, push harder, work harder.
Thank you. Is there something you wanted to contribute, Hannah?
I don't know. I can answer this question from a perspective of project manager. So it's that you tell a story. First of all, it's very important to tell a story. Once you're somewhere abroad or in your country and you have somebody who never knew what you're experiencing, you, in the politest and gentlest way possible, try to tell them a story, or it can be in other way, but still our stories is what we are worth of. Yeah, it's our main volume nowadays. And then you accidentally, or not accidentally, on purpose, receive an email. And what I, as a project manager, have to do is always answer everyone's email. And this happens to be an email from the Exeter UNESCO City of Literature. So you bring two wonderful poets, Yulia Musakovska and Elena Hoseinova, to the festival in Exeter, UNESCO City of Literature. And there you get acquainted with wonderful Helen Vasala and Hugh Roberts. And that's how it happens. That's how the magic happens. And now you're here. You have a work on a wonderful project that is going to make huge success, I hope. And you're happy about it. And you sit here at this very moment, at this event, and talk about Ukrainian experience for 40 people. Isn't that wonderful? And also what I want to emphasize is that your support to us is as important as our support to ourselves, because it's very powerful just to feel the energy of this warmth that you giving us. So thank you.
Thank you for those beautiful and heartfelt comments, Hannah. I'd love to, before we just move into the question and answer, offer an opportunity for a final reading, if there's anything from your own work that you feel able to share. Yulia, Anna, I don't know if there's anything you would be willing to share with us.
Sure, maybe you want to go ahead.
Since we are talking about military poets, I think I will read one of the of my poems that is from The God of Freedom, that is available tonight. And this is a poem from 2017. and that book was published in 2021 in Ukrainian, but I started writing about the war since the very beginning in 2014. So I just feel that this poem is a constant reminder of the courage and the sacrifice. And just to save us time, I'm going to read it in English, translated by Olena Jennings. It's called A Soldier is Born. Bullets of rain hit the roof, hit me in the gut. What are you dreaming of, poet of the warm home front? The storm is wailing for them, mourning them quietly. Life went out as if a feather has flown away. Fingers break bread, put an enemy through the ringer. Laying down, he awaits the coming that will never be. Memorial candles lined up along the road again. Black ribbons like leeches feed at the flags. A rosary of beans picked by grandma. His father's warm socks made of scratchy wool. With all of this, with his body, he will knead the new clay. With his mouth, he will scoop water from a leaky boat. Who are you? The one with a glance that hurts more than a rod? A newborn or confined to a uniform? An inconspicuous metal toy figurine fell off the table, punched a hole in the earth's crust.
Thank you so much, Julia. Shall we end with a reading from your book, Anna?
Yes, sure. It's very different. I don't write such beautiful poetry, unfortunate. Since I already started talking about Angela, who survived Kherson torture, I think I will tell her story. And I'm sorry because this is not a good story. Or it is a good story. She survived it. But I think I want to give her a voice, because she's a fellow journalist. I read like a few paragraphs, because I write long stories. So we were 5 women in one cell for 3 people, Angela recalled. We called our cell Ward number 6. This is a reference to a short story by Anton Chekhov, where he describes a mental institution. For Angela, her imprisonment reminded her of that. She spent some months in the city's temporary detention facility, which Russians turned into a large torture chamber. Angela was taken to prison from her own house. Russian soldiers appeared on the doorstep of her Kherson apartment, put a bag on her head, and absconded her. Her partner, Alexander, was also detained, although she was not informed about his whereabouts. Then she describes the torture, and I'm gonna skip that. Angela and her cellmates regularly heard other prisoners, men, being tortured in the cell next to them. Many were former soldiers or volunteers, some were regular citizens who dared to protest against Russian occupation, and others were just random locals. Angela recalled listening to Russian guards arguing how to dispose of the body of a man they had murdered. She also heard a person raped in the neighboring cell. The noise of guards dragging a corpse through the hallway became a familiar sound. We knew it was our boys that were tortured with electrocution. They were beaten and forced to speak. Angela said, Russians did not know anything about the pain. They spread their toxicity into all living things. Wretched creatures. Angela's cellmate, a 66-year-old woman who had a heart attack while in prison and died. She was captured because her son was a local volunteer. And this story goes on like this, with a lot of really nasty things. but I just wanted to give you a piece of Angela's mind, how she lived through her son occupation. Thank you.
I know we're short of time and a wine reception is across the hall, so if we could limit the audience questions to just a couple and then we can continue discussing over a glass of wine in the next room. But I want to make sure that if you have any burning questions for our panel right now, that you get a chance to ask one or two.
Thank you so much. This has been so valuable to hear from you, and thank you for sharing so many complicated emotions and helping us to understand better some of these experiences. Anna touched a little bit on working with foreign journalists and trying to explain the anger that you were feeling to them, and you also mentioned talking to a British journalist. But from Anna or from all of you, from your experience of either working with foreign journalists or foreign partners inside of Ukraine, or your experience being outside of Ukraine, trying to communicate this experience, I wonder whether there are any repeated things that you feel are misunderstood or that are particularly difficult to share, or things as well for people like myself who aren't Ukrainian, who are trying hard to help to share these stories from abroad. I think there are often things that we get wrong or that we aren't sensitive to, and I wonder whether you have any thoughts to share in that direction.
Probably I will share with you my favorite stories. There is a British journalist. She lives now in Kiev and writes a lot for UK media. And I made like 5 programs about documentaries, journalists who work with theme of war in Ukraine and in Ukrainian language, and not only in Ukrainian language. And I saw her article in The Economist, and it was, and I liked this article. It was something interesting in this article. And then I asked her to come to radio and to tell the story how she turned to be a UK journalist who is writing about Ukraine, and we have this good conversation. She told me about themes which she is interested in, and so on and so forth. And then, and all the time, it was like 40 minutes talk. All the time she repeated, Ukraine is extremely important now for the whole world. In the UK, people wanted to know a lot about the Ukrainian culture. It's so important not just to tell about the war, but also about Ukrainian culture. You had such extremely interesting culture. You have so many great artists and writers. And then, in the end of this talk, I asked her, what is your favorite Ukrainian painter, favorite Ukrainian writer, and I was sure she will tell me something. And she said, unfortunately, I never read Ukrainian literature. I never read books about Ukraine. I know Luke Garding wrote a book about Ukraine, but I didn't manage to read it. And then I decided to reread this article, which I liked so much. And I reread this article, and I asked my colleague, photographer, with whom I started to work in the end of autumn, brilliant Mikhailo Polinchak. Probably you saw his photos in UK newspapers and magazines. And I said, that's the story about guy, and I feel that something wrong with this story. And we came to this guy, and everything was wrong with this story. She just fictionalized the whole story. It is a story orphan.
Manager, the head of something, the head of. No.
That's a
loner.
That's a person who survived, who was in prison since 2015 till 2018, and he he was changed in 2018. He came back to Ukraine, and he didn't find for himself a place in like normal Ukrainian life, and he made a house for himself on the bench of Dnipro River, and he is living alone there for since 2020, for 4 years. And she made a story which was very bright. It was a lot of different funny things he found somewhere and made his life on the beautiful bank of the river. But it is extremely horrible story, and he lives in extremely horrible life, and he has a lot of mental problems, and nobody could help him. And she put this story as a story of someone who controlled his life and who doesn't need anyone to be like happy. And that's my favorite story about foreign journalists in Ukraine. Sometimes they are not documenting what is happening. They just made a good story to be sold. And my second favorite story about my connection with foreign media is fresh enough. It was in the end of May when Ukrainian Intelligence Service made an announcement that invasion from Sumy region is possible during 2 weeks. And another my colleague photographer asked me to come with him through the Russian border to see what is happening on this Sumy region during this time when we are waiting for this probably invasion from Sumy region. And we made a trip during 3 days. We were traveling, if it's possible to say so, through the Russian border. We saw these people who are living 1 kilometer from Russian border and they are attacked each day. We saw what they are doing, and we saw these dead cities and cities which are not so dead. So that was, for me, it was like a very good road story about this life, which is almost invisible, because Sumy region is not so famous as Kharkiv region or Kherson region. A lot of people on checkpoints saw our accreditations for the first time, and they saw journalists for the first time. And that's something invisible, but at the same time, the story for me was such story which can explain a lot about this ordinary way of invisible way of life, and all we're talking about here, about this culture and risk, this way of life in risk, and it's, by the way, it was extremely beautiful, because May in Sumy region is really beautiful, and all these people, they are have flowers near the Russian border and try to grow up tomatoes and so on and so forth. And my colleague from who has some connections with UK media write a letter to one UK media, and they said we are not interested in this part of Ukraine and the stories of such kind. That's my two favorite stories about our connections and our relationships and the communications we could have.
I think we clearly have work to do. I have had the nod that we need to move through to the next room, so I'm so sorry for anybody who had questions that we haven't been able to take, but please do join us for a glass of wine so that you can ask them in a more informal setting. But I'd like to invite you all to join me in thanking our wonderful speakers.